She had plans for the next morning. A family dinner was scheduled. Her phone sat near her bed, unanswered. The TV was still on. Makeup on the vanity. Wine glasses in the sink. It looked like a night in. But by sunrise, Lauren Smith Fields would be found dead on her apartment floor, and what followed would leave more questions than answers, and a silence that speaks louder than any official statement. Lauren wasn't just another victim. She was a 23-year-old woman with dreams, ambition, and a quiet confidence. A college student studying physical therapy. A daughter who spoke to her mom every day. A sister who laughed easily. She was bright, beautiful, and careful. But none of that mattered on December 12, 2021, when a 911 call came in from her apartment in Bridgeport, Connecticut. The voice on the other end of the line wasn't frantic. It was composed. Calm. A man, 37 years old, said he had spent the night with Lauren after meeting her on Bumble. They drank, watched a movie. He said she got up at some point in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. Then, she never woke up. When police arrived, Lauren was already gone. She lay on the floor, unresponsive. The man was not detained. He wasn't treated as a suspect. He was never even publicly named. They didn't take him in for questioning. They didn't search him, didn't collect his clothes. They let him go. Just like that. What happened next is where the story truly begins. Because from that moment forward, it wasn't just Lauren's death that disturbed people. It was the way her case was handled. Or rather, mishandled. The detectives didn't notify her family. Her mother, Chantel, found out over a day later after calling repeatedly, showing up at the apartment herself, and being told by the landlord that her daughter was dead. The police hadn't called. No one had. There was no courtesy, no protocol, just silence. The apartment was never sealed as a crime scene. Evidence was not preserved. Blood-stained sheets, used condoms, an open pill packet, alcohol containers, all left behind. Her family had to collect them, with gloves, in disbelief. Her father said it felt like they were the ones conducting the investigation, not the police. And through it all, the man, the last known person to see Lauren alive, walked away without scrutiny. Police referred to him only as a nice guy. No arrest, no warrant, no DNA request. As if his story was accepted before it was ever questioned. For Lauren's family, the horror was twofold. First, the unbearable shock of losing her. Then, the slow realization that no one intended to find out why. That the people paid to protect her were already moving on. The autopsy report would take nearly a month. When it finally came, it listed the cause of death as acute intoxication due to the combined effects of fentanyl, promethazine, hydroxyzine, and alcohol. But Lauren had no history of drug use, no mental health crisis, no pattern of substance abuse. She had gone on a first date. She hadn't expected to die. And still, even with fentanyl in her system, a controlled substance known for being lethal in trace amounts, there was no criminal investigation. In the next part, we will dive deeper into the timeline of that final night, the inconsistencies in the official narrative, and the growing movement demanding answers. Because Lauren Smith Fields didn't just die alone, she died ignored. What happened in the final hours of Lauren Smith Fields' life remains tangled in contradiction, silence, and systemic failure. The 23-year-old college student, known for her discipline and gentle presence, had scheduled a date with a man she had recently met through a dating app. He was 37, significantly older, and someone she had only just begun speaking to. He arrived at her apartment late in the evening. According to his version of events, they drank tequila, watched a movie, ate food, and talked. He claimed that she got up to use the bathroom in the middle of the night and never woke up. That's the story he gave police, and it was accepted without question. There was no thorough interrogation, no detainment, no search warrant, no suspicion. Authorities treated him not as a possible suspect, but as a neutral witness. The Bridgeport police never preserved the apartment as a crime scene. The wine glasses, used condoms, bloody sheets, and scattered medications were left behind, untouched. The evidence was so poorly handled that Lauren's own family had to gather items themselves, using gloves, trying to piece together what had happened without any guidance from the authorities. The people responsible for protecting the truth seemed more interested in closing the file than understanding it. Lauren's mother, Chantel Fields, discovered her daughter had died not through official notification, but after countless unanswered calls and a visit to the apartment, where a landlord coldly told her that Lauren was gone. No police officer had reached out. No procedure had been followed. The shock of losing her daughter was compounded by the cruelty of indifference. Weeks passed before the autopsy report was released. It stated that Lauren died of acute intoxication caused by a combination of fentanyl, promethazine, hydroxyzine, and alcohol. These substances, especially fentanyl, are deadly even in small doses. Yet despite the presence of these drugs, none of which Lauren was known to use, authorities continued to treat the case as an accidental overdose. There was no push for investigation, no effort to determine how the drugs entered her system, and no examination of whether she had been drugged without her knowledge. Her family, stunned by the lack of urgency, began asking questions the police refused to answer. Why wasn't the last person to see Lauren alive properly investigated? Why was her apartment left unsecured? Why was she, a healthy young woman with no history of drug abuse, found with a fatal mix of substances in her body, and the case dismissed before it was even opened? The detectives assigned to Lauren S. case reportedly referred to the man she met as a nice guy. That simple phrase, delivered with such casual detachment, became symbolic of everything wrong with the investigation. The system's willingness to believe him over examining the facts, to excuse inaction under the guise of assumption, became a central point of anger and heartbreak. Lauren's case didn't make headlines at first. The national media showed little interest. Only after weeks of pressure from her family and social media did the story begin to break through. Hashtags began trending. People started paying attention. Celebrities raised their voices, and the silence that once surrounded Lauren's death began to crack. But as of that moment, no charges had been filed. No DNA had been collected. No arrests had been made. A woman was dead, and the narrative built around her was one of dismissiveness. It was a story told through absence, a lack of care, a lack of justice, a lack of basic human response. By the time Lauren's name began to circulate beyond her hometown, it was already too late. The damage had been done, not only to her body but to the investigation that should have followed. What sparked next was not a response from the system. It was an eruption from the people. The silence around Lauren's death did not dissolve. It cracked under the weight of thousands of voices demanding to know why she was left behind. What began as a private tragedy slowly transformed into a national reckoning. Social media became the first courtroom. Hashtags like Justice for Lauren and Lauren Smithfields flooded timelines. Her photos, bright-eyed, joyful, alive, stood in sharp contrast to the cold, sterile language of the official reports. Influencers, activists, journalists, and everyday citizens began to ask the same questions Lauren's family had been screaming for weeks. Why was the man she met with never treated as a suspect? Why was the scene never secured? Why were the police so quick to declare her death an accident despite the lethal cocktail of drugs found in her system? The answers never came from law enforcement. Instead, they came from the growing number of people who saw in Lauren's story a painful pattern. Black women found dead. Investigations rushed or ignored. Media interest minimal. Public pressure dismissed unless amplified by outrage. For many, Lauren's death was not just about one night. It was about years, decades of being unseen. Her family organized vigils and public demonstrations. On what would have been her 24th birthday, they held a rally on the steps of Bridgeport City Hall. The crowd gathered in the cold, candles lit, signs raised high. Some held photos of Lauren. Others held signs with names of other black women whose deaths had been overlooked. One sign read, "If Lauren were white, we'd already have answers." Another simply said, "Investigate him." Only after weeks of mounting pressure did city officials begin to move. The mayor announced an internal review of the police department's handling of the case. The detective assigned to Lauren's investigation was eventually suspended, not fired, not charged, just removed temporarily after failing to notify the family of her death. It felt like an attempt to pacify the storm, not a genuine pursuit of accountability. Meanwhile, Lauren's family hired an independent attorney and began their own search for the truth. They submitted formal requests for toxicology details, pushed for surveillance footage, and questioned why key evidence was never tested. They made public what law enforcement had failed to disclose, forcing transparency where there had been only avoidance. Every detail uncovered pointed to the same conclusion. Lauren Smith Fields did not receive a proper investigation. She did not receive the benefit of doubt. Her life was not given the value it deserved by the people who were supposed to protect her. In the next and final part, we will reflect on what Lauren's case reveals about systemic neglect, what justice means when it comes too late, and why her story must continue to be told, not just for her, but for every woman whose voice has been silenced by power, prejudice, or fear. Justice is not always delivered in a courtroom. Sometimes it's whispered through protest chants, written on cardboard signs, or passed down through stories told in the dark corners of digital memory. For Lauren Smith Fields, justice has not come in the form of accountability. Not through arrest, not through conviction. What remains is a name, a family still screaming, and a wound that refuses to heal because the system that failed her has never acknowledged its failure. After weeks of public pressure, the Bridgeport Police Department issued a statement announcing an internal review. But by then, it was too late. The investigation had already been mishandled. The evidence had been compromised, and the man who last saw Lauren alive had never been truly questioned. 2 detectives were reassigned, not for negligence in handling her case, but for procedural mistakes in notifying her family. The message was clear. The system was more concerned with appearances than accountability. Lauren's family, refusing to let her story die in silence, continued their pursuit of truth. They filed a notice of claim against the city of Bridgeport, signaling intent to sue for civil rights violations and investigative misconduct. They gave interviews, held rallies, and kept her name alive on every platform available to them. What they sought was simple: an investigation worthy of the life that had been lost. The broader public began to recognize the pattern. Black women across the country saw in Lauren's case a reflection of their own vulnerability. The data speaks for itself. Missing and murdered black women are disproportionately ignored by the media, under-investigated by law enforcement, and underrepresented in public outrage. Lauren's death was not an isolated failure. It was the symptom of a much deeper rot. News outlets eventually caught up. Major platforms published delayed features, many only after the story had gone viral online. Politicians released statements condemning the lack of urgency. But Lauren was still gone, and the man at the center of it all remained unnamed in official records, untouched by legal consequence, shielded by the very silence that had buried Lauren's story from the beginning. So what does justice look like now? For some, it's reopening the investigation. For others, it's policy change, mandatory toxicology reviews, automatic suspect questioning in overdose cases, greater oversight in law enforcement procedure. For Lauren's family, justice is making sure her name is never forgotten, that no one else's daughter, sister, or friend meets the same silent end. This is not the end of Lauren Smithfield's story. It is only the end of the part the system tried to write. The rest belongs to those who speak her name, demand the truth, and refuse to look away. She was not disposable. She was not forgettable. She was loved, and she deserved more. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Share this story. Speak her name. This was Shadow Files. Until next time.